Police have issued an arrest warrant for your soulmate and will arrest them as soon as. My beloved child. An arrest warrant has just been issued for your soulmate, and the most frightening part is not the warrant itself. It is the single condition written beside their name. The moment that condition is met, the police can move in. Your soulmate learned about it only hours ago, and their first reaction was not to run, hide, or call an attorney. They asked one question. Does this have anything to do with them? They meant you. And when the person on the other end of the phone went silent, your soulmate knew something was terribly wrong. There is a detail buried inside this case that no one expected to connect back to you. But before you assume your soulmate has done something terrible, you need to hear what investigators actually found, because the evidence is pointing in a direction that makes almost no sense. Don't skip. One missing piece changes the entire meaning of this warrant. Earlier, your soulmate received a warning from someone who had seen part of the case file. At first, they thought it had to be a misunderstanding. Their name appeared beside an incident they claimed they had never been involved in, at a place they insisted they had never visited. But then they were shown something that made them stop speaking. A timestamp, a record, and one familiar detail that only a handful of people should have known. Suddenly, this no longer looked like a random mistake. Someone may have deliberately created a trail leading investigators straight toward your soulmate. And whoever did it understood their routine well enough to make the story appear believable. Your soulmate started replaying recent conversations in their mind, searching for the moment they might have revealed too much. Then they remembered one person who had been asking strangely specific questions about you. Why would someone gathering information about your soulmate be so interested in your name? That question became even more disturbing when another message arrived. Your soulmate was told that officers were not planning to wait indefinitely. They were watching for one specific event, and as soon as it happened, the warrant could turn into an arrest. Your soulmate stared at the message because that event was already approaching, and they knew it. Still, instead of disappearing, they made an unexpected decision. They began gathering old messages, dates, and records, convinced there was something investigators had overlooked. Then, hidden inside an ordinary conversation, they found a detail that changed their expression completely. Someone had apparently known about the investigation before your soulmate did. Even worse, that person had sent a message days earlier containing almost the exact wording later connected to the allegation. Your soulmate immediately recognized who sent it. But they also realized something else. Exposing that person could reveal a secret involving you that they had been protecting for a very long time. And just as they prepared to make their next move, they learned exactly what the police were waiting for before making the arrest. What the police were waiting for was not your soulmate leaving town, making a suspicious phone call, or trying to disappear. It was something far more ordinary, and that made it terrifying. Investigators had been told that your soulmate would soon meet someone connected to the evidence, and they believed that meeting would confirm everything they needed. The problem? Your soulmate had never arranged such a meeting. Yet a message had appeared on their phone showing a time and location as though they had. That was when they understood the trap was still unfolding. Someone was not simply trying to make them look guilty after the fact. Someone was actively predicting their movements, creating evidence before those movements even happened. And the scheduled meeting was only hours away. Your soulmate could ignore it, but would that make them appear afraid? Or could going there lead directly into the arrest someone had carefully prepared? Then came the detail that made everything personal. While comparing the suspicious message with older conversations, your soulmate noticed a phrase that had been used before. It was unusual, something most people would never think twice about, but your soulmate remembered exactly who spoke that way. It belonged to the same person who had recently asked questions about you. Suddenly, scattered pieces began fitting together. This person knew your soulmate's schedule. They knew enough about your connection to you to understand what could shake them emotionally. And they apparently knew something about the investigation before anyone was supposed to know. But one question remained unanswered: why go this far? Your soulmate searched deeper and discovered that the strange questions about you had started immediately after one particular event between the two of you. Something had happened that day which apparently convinced this person that your soulmate was about to make a life-changing decision involving you. Stay till the end, because that decision may be the real reason this entire situation began. Your soulmate finally stopped reacting and started thinking several moves ahead. Instead of responding to the suspicious meeting request, they preserved everything. The messages, timestamps, earlier conversations, and the detail connecting them to the person they now suspected. Then another piece surfaced. One of the records being used against your soulmate contained a time that could potentially prove they were somewhere else entirely. And there was someone who could confirm it. You. But bringing your name into the investigation meant exposing something your soulmate had deliberately kept private, something they feared could change the way you understood their actions. For several minutes, they struggled with the choice. Protect the secret and risk letting the case move forward, or tell the truth and finally reveal what they had been doing behind your back. Before they could decide, their phone rang again. This time, the warning was brutally simple. Officers had received new information, the planned meeting was no longer the only trigger, and someone had just told police exactly where your soulmate could be found. Your soulmate froze when they heard those words, because the location given to police was not somewhere random. It was a place they had planned to visit for one reason connected directly to you. Almost no one knew about it. That meant whoever had contacted investigators was much closer to the situation than your soulmate had imagined. But instead of panicking, they noticed something important. The caller had revealed too much. If police had supposedly learned the location through ordinary investigative work, why did the information match a private conversation from days earlier almost word for word? Your soulmate pulled up that conversation and read it again. There it was, a tiny detail they had overlooked. Someone had asked exactly when they would be there. At the time, the question seemed harmless. Now it looked completely different. Your soulmate finally understood that the person behind this had not been guessing their movements. They had been collecting them. But then something unexpected happened. Your soulmate received confirmation that one piece of evidence connected to the warrant was already being questioned. A record that supposedly placed them near the center of the incident did not perfectly match another timestamp from the same period. There was a gap. Small, but potentially enormous. Your soulmate immediately searched through their own records, trying to reconstruct those missing minutes, and that was when your name appeared. Not inside the allegation, but inside something that could help explain where your soulmate actually was. They stared at it because revealing this would mean admitting why they had secretly gone somewhere that day. And the reason was deeply personal. They had been preparing something involving you, something they were not ready for you to discover yet. Suddenly, the case was forcing them toward a choice they had avoided for months: protect that private truth, or reveal it before someone else turned their silence against them. Then your soulmate noticed one final detail in the records, and everything shifted again. The suspicious person had contacted them shortly before the disputed timestamp, asking a question that now seemed designed to establish where they would be. Minutes later, another message appeared from an unfamiliar number. Your soulmate had ignored it at the time, but now they opened it carefully and realized it contained information only the suspected person should have possessed. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate finally had a possible link between the person watching their movements and the evidence being used against them. But before they could hand it over, another message appeared on the screen. It was from someone who claimed to know why your soulmate had been targeted, and they warned that the warrant was only one part of a much bigger plan involving the secret your soulmate had been keeping from you. The stranger's message contained one sentence your soulmate could not ignore: "They are afraid of what you were about to tell them." Your soulmate immediately knew who "them" meant: you. Suddenly, the warrant began to look connected to something far more personal than anyone had admitted. The sender claimed that someone close to the situation had learned about your soulmate's private plans involving you and had become desperate to stop those plans from moving forward. But your soulmate refused to trust an anonymous warning without proof. They asked for one detail only the real source could know. Seconds later, a photograph arrived. It showed a document your soulmate recognized immediately, because they had seen part of it before. Yet this version contained an additional name that had never appeared on the copy they knew about. Your soulmate stared at that name, then whispered, "So that's how they knew." But why would this person risk an arrest warrant simply to keep your soulmate away from you? The answer started emerging when your soulmate examined the timeline again. Days before the investigation intensified, they had quietly made a decision about your future together. They had not announced it. They had barely spoken about it. Yet somehow, the suspected person learned enough to realize that once your soulmate told you the truth, their influence over the situation could disappear completely. That gave them something investigators had not yet considered: a possible motive for manipulation. Your soulmate began organizing every message chronologically, and a pattern appeared. Each time they moved closer to revealing their secret to you, something happened to interrupt them. A strange warning, an unexpected accusation, a misleading message. Coincidence could explain one event. Maybe two. But this many? Your soulmate no longer believed it. And then they found the most unsettling connection yet. The person who had supposedly provided new information to police had contacted the suspected individual shortly before doing so. Your soulmate now had enough questions to challenge the story, but questions alone would not erase a warrant. They needed something verifiable, something that could separate genuine evidence from whatever may have been manipulated. That was when they remembered the missing minutes in the timeline, and the record involving you. Revealing it could potentially establish where they had actually been, but it would also expose the private reason they were there. After everything that had happened, your soulmate finally decided the secret was no longer worth protecting if silence allowed someone else to control the story. They reached for the record and prepared to hand it over. Then they saw something they had somehow missed before. Another person's name appeared beside the timestamp. Your soulmate knew that name very well. More importantly, that person could confirm exactly what happened during the missing minutes. But when your soulmate tried to contact them, someone else answered their phone, and what they said changed the direction of the entire case. The voice on the other end did not introduce themselves. Instead, they quietly said, "Stop searching for that person. They already told the police everything." Your soulmate felt their stomach drop. Everything? What exactly had been said? They demanded an explanation, but the caller gave only one warning. The witness connected to those missing minutes had been questioned earlier that day, and their statement did not match the version investigators had originally received. That should have been good news. Instead, it created an even bigger mystery, because according to the caller, someone had tried to persuade that witness to change one crucial detail: the exact time your soulmate arrived. Your soulmate immediately understood why those few minutes mattered. If the original timeline shifted even slightly, one of the strongest assumptions behind the accusation could begin to collapse. But who knew the case well enough to understand exactly which timestamp needed to change? Your soulmate refused to move until they could verify the claim. They compared the witness's name against every conversation they had saved, and something unexpected surfaced. Several days before the warrant was issued, the suspected person had mentioned that same witness casually, almost as if testing whether your soulmate knew them. At the time, it meant nothing. Now it felt deliberate. Then another saved message revealed something even stranger. The suspected person had asked where your soulmate would be on the exact day connected to the investigation. Your soulmate had answered vaguely, never giving the precise location. So how had someone later described their movements in such detail? There had to be another source. Don't skip, because this is where your soulmate realized they might have been watching the wrong person. Someone else had access to information the suspected person could never have obtained alone, and that second person was much closer than anyone expected. Then the witness finally contacted your soulmate directly. Their message was short, nervous, and impossible to misunderstand. They confirmed that your soulmate had been with them during part of the disputed timeline, but they added something your soulmate was completely unprepared to hear. They had not been alone. Another person had seen your soulmate there, and that person had specifically asked the witness not to mention it unless absolutely necessary. Why would an innocent observer want their presence hidden? Your soulmate asked for the name. For several minutes, there was no response. Meanwhile, another warning arrived saying officers were preparing to act on the warrant as soon as your soulmate reached the location they believed they were heading toward. Finally, the witness replied with the hidden observer's identity. Your soulmate read the name twice. Their hands went still, because this was someone they trusted, and someone who already knew the secret they had been keeping from you. For several seconds, your soulmate could not accept what they were seeing. The hidden observer was someone who had listened to their fears, knew about their private plans involving you, and had repeatedly acted as though they wanted the two of you to find clarity. Yet this person had been present during the exact window now being questioned, and had chosen to remain invisible. Your soulmate immediately called them. No answer. They called again. Nothing. Then a message appeared: "Please don't involve me." You don't understand what really happened. That sentence changed everything. Your soulmate replied with one question, "Then tell me before the police get here." The response came almost instantly. The observer claimed they had stayed silent because revealing where your soulmate had been would expose the secret involving you. But that explanation created another problem. If they were truly protecting your soulmate, why had they never warned them that the timeline being used against them was wrong? Your soulmate pressed harder, and the story began to crack. The observer admitted that someone had contacted them before investigators ever asked questions. That person already knew about the disputed time, already knew your soulmate had been there, and desperately wanted the observer to remain quiet. In return, they promised that your soulmate would never actually be arrested. The pressure would supposedly disappear once your soulmate abandoned one particular decision. Your soulmate read that line again. One particular decision. There it was. The warrant, the strange messages, the manipulated timeline, and the effort to keep a witness silent all seemed to circle back toward the same thing, whatever your soulmate had been preparing to do concerning you. But the observer still refused to identify who had approached them. Your soulmate needed proof, not another vague accusation. So they asked whether anything from that conversation remained. The observer hesitated before admitting there was one thing they had never deleted, a voice message. That recording was only seconds long, but its meaning was enormous. Your soulmate listened once, then again. The speaker never openly admitted to creating false evidence or controlling the investigation. Instead, they said something far more revealing: keep them away until the decision changes. After that, this problem disappears. Your soulmate recognized the voice. More importantly, they recognized the reference to the decision. Only a tiny number of people knew what your soulmate had planned for you. Stay till the end, because they finally understood why their private secret mattered so much. They had been preparing to give you something that could permanently change the future between you, and one person believed that once you received it, there would be no way to pull your soulmate back. But before your soulmate could preserve the recording and provide it to the appropriate people, the observer sent another message: there's something else you need to know. The person on that recording isn't the one who started this. That revelation hit harder than anything your soulmate had heard so far. If the familiar voice on the recording had not started this, then someone else had been directing events from the shadows while allowing another person to take the blame. The observer finally explained why they had been terrified to speak. The person behind everything seemed to know details from conversations that were never supposed to leave a very small circle. They knew when your soulmate planned to reveal the secret to you. They knew where your soulmate would be during the disputed timeline. And somehow, they even knew which witness could confirm it. Your soulmate asked the obvious question: who had access to all of that? The observer did not give a name. Instead, they mentioned an old conversation your soulmate had completely forgotten, one that took place shortly before the first strange accusation appeared. And suddenly, your soulmate remembered exactly who had been standing close enough to hear it. That memory changed the entire pattern. During that conversation, your soulmate had spoken about you with unusual certainty. They had finally admitted that they were tired of allowing fear, confusion, and other people's opinions to determine what happened between you. They had made a private decision, and although they never revealed every detail, they said enough for someone listening nearby to understand that something permanent was coming. Days later, the unexplained messages began. Then came questions about their schedule. Then the disputed evidence. Then the warrant. Your soulmate had treated those events as separate problems, but now they lined up almost perfectly. Still, one thing bothered them. Overhearing a conversation could explain motive, but it could not explain access to information connected to the investigation. Whoever orchestrated this needed another connection, someone capable of feeding them details they should never have known. And your soulmate was about to discover where that connection came from. The observer sent one final piece of information, a screenshot from an earlier exchange they had been afraid to reveal. Most of it looked ordinary until your soulmate noticed a contact identifier near the top. They had seen it before, buried inside the records they had collected after learning about the warrant. The same identifier appeared shortly before new information was reportedly passed along to investigators. Your soulmate's pulse quickened. This did not prove who had created the accusation, but it established a connection they could finally examine instead of relying on suspicion. They preserved the screenshot alongside the voice message and prepared to disclose both through the proper legal process. Then another message arrived from the witness. Before you do anything, ask why they needed you arrested specifically before tomorrow. Tomorrow. Your soulmate stared at that word because tomorrow was the day they had secretly chosen to finally give you what they had been protecting, and suddenly the timing of the warrant no longer looked accidental. Tomorrow was supposed to be the day your soulmate stopped hiding what they truly wanted. They had prepared everything quietly, believing that if they waited until the right moment, they could finally explain why they had acted so strangely around you for months. But now the timing of the warrant made that private plan impossible to ignore. Someone apparently needed your soulmate distracted, separated from you, or unable to reach you before tomorrow arrived. The witness urged them to examine one particular message from weeks earlier, a message your soulmate had dismissed as harmless. It asked a strangely specific question: if you had one chance to tell them everything, when would you do it? Your soulmate remembered answering without thinking. Before the end of this month. That answer had seemed meaningless then. Now they realized they had unknowingly given someone a deadline. And the warrant had appeared just before that deadline expired. Your soulmate began searching backward instead of forward. Rather than focusing only on who knew about the investigation, they asked who had the most to lose if you finally learned the truth. One name kept resurfacing. Not because there was proof against them yet, but because they had repeatedly tried to discourage your soulmate from speaking to you. They had called the timing wrong. They had warned that you might misunderstand. They had even suggested waiting several more months. At first, your soulmate believed those warnings came from concern. But now one conversation sounded completely different. This person had once said, once they know what you've done for them, everything changes. How could they know what your soulmate had done when that was the very secret your soulmate had protected? Something huge is waiting for you, because that question led them back to a document they had never realized anyone else had seen. The document was not evidence of wrongdoing. It was a private record your soulmate had kept while preparing to explain everything to you: dates, decisions, sacrifices, and one promise they had made without ever telling you. But when they opened the original file, they noticed its access history contained an unfamiliar entry. Someone had viewed it before the investigation escalated. Your soulmate checked the date. It was the same day the strange questions about their schedule began. Suddenly, the secret involving you was no longer just an emotional piece of the story. It could explain how another person learned enough to anticipate your soulmate's plans. Yet one mystery remained. Accessing that information could reveal what your soulmate intended to do tomorrow, but it still did not explain how the warrant itself had become involved. Then the observer sent a final screenshot showing who had received information from that private record, and your soulmate recognized the recipient as someone connected to the very first allegation that started the case. The recipient's name forced your soulmate to reconsider the beginning of the entire case. This was not a stranger who had suddenly appeared after the warrant. This person had been present around the first allegation, quietly asking questions while everyone else was still trying to understand what had happened. Your soulmate had never considered them important because they always seemed one step removed from everything. But the screenshot suggested they had received information from the private record before several details about your soulmate's movements began circulating. That did not automatically prove they had fabricated anything, and your soulmate knew better than to jump to conclusions. Instead, they started comparing dates. The private file was accessed first. Hours later, the recipient contacted someone connected to the disputed incident. The following day, questions began appearing about your soulmate's schedule. And shortly afterward, information emerged that eventually contributed to the warrant. For the first time, there was a sequence worth examining. Then your soulmate discovered something even stranger. The recipient had not simply received information about tomorrow's plan involving you. They had apparently been interested in one specific part of it, the reason your soulmate needed to reach you before anyone could interfere. That reason was buried near the end of the private record, alongside a promise your soulmate had never spoken aloud. Whatever that promise was, it seemed important enough that someone wanted to delay it. Your soulmate finally stopped protecting the document and prepared to provide the relevant records to their attorney so the timeline could be properly reviewed. But before doing so, they reread the final page, and one sentence caught their attention. It referenced an earlier event involving you, an event that could independently establish where your soulmate had been during part of the disputed timeline. Suddenly, their private secret was not merely connected to motive. It might also help challenge a crucial assumption in the case. That realization gave your soulmate a new direction. They contacted the witness again and asked whether investigators had ever been told about that earlier event. The answer was no. Someone had apparently described your soulmate's movements without mentioning the one detail that could place those movements in an entirely different context. Why would anyone leave that out? Your soulmate preserved the original file, the access history, the witness messages, and the voice recording, determined to let the evidence speak instead of making accusations they could not prove. Then the phone rang. This time it was their attorney with an urgent update. The police had received information about where your soulmate was expected to be, but the new material your soulmate had gathered could change what happened next. There was only one problem. Before anything could be reviewed, your soulmate needed to explain the hidden event involving you, and once they revealed it, the secret they had protected for months would finally be exposed. Your soulmate knew there was no safe way to keep the secret anymore. Their attorney needed the complete timeline, and leaving you out of it could make the most important evidence impossible to understand. So, for the first time, your soulmate explained what had happened during those missing minutes. On the day investigators believed they were somewhere else, your soulmate had quietly gone to collect something meant for you. It was not random, and it was not impulsive. They had spent months preparing it because it represented a decision they had been too afraid to say aloud. There was a receipt, a timestamp, a security record, and potentially another witness who remembered seeing them. Suddenly, the private event your soulmate feared revealing became one of the strongest ways to verify their movements. But their attorney noticed something else. The time printed on that record directly conflicted with a key assumption behind the allegation. If the record could be independently confirmed, someone's version of events had a serious problem. That should have brought relief, but another question immediately took its place. Why had the person behind the strange messages seemed so certain this record would never surface? Your soulmate returned to the private file and discovered the answer hidden in an older exchange. Someone had specifically encouraged them to keep the surprise for you completely secret. No calls, no messages, no telling friends, nothing that could reveal where they were going. At the time, your soulmate thought the advice was thoughtful. Now it looked different. Keeping the event private had also made their movements harder to establish later. Don't skip, because the person who gave that advice was connected to the same circle surrounding the recipient from the screenshot. Your soulmate still could not prove intent, but the coincidence was becoming difficult to dismiss. Then their attorney asked one question that changed the strategy completely. Who knew you would have no obvious alibi during that exact window? Your soulmate could think of only 3 people. One was the witness who had already come forward. Another was the observer who preserved the voice message. The third was the person who had repeatedly encouraged secrecy around your surprise. That narrowed the mystery, but before your soulmate could examine it further, their attorney received an update. Officers were already moving toward the location they expected your soulmate to reach. The warrant had not vanished. The new record still needed to be authenticated and presented through the proper process. Your soulmate was told not to interfere, resist, or make any reckless move. Instead, they prepared the evidence and waited for legal guidance. Then a message arrived from the third person on that list, someone your soulmate had not contacted at all. It contained only 7 words: "I know you found the receipt now." Your soulmate stared at the screen, because there was no innocent explanation for one question: how did they know? Your soulmate did not answer immediately. Those 7 words had revealed more than the sender probably intended. The receipt had never been mentioned publicly, and until minutes earlier, only your soulmate, their attorney, and the person who issued it should have known it had been found. So how could this third person know? Your soulmate took a screenshot and forwarded it to their attorney instead of confronting anyone. Then another message arrived: "You're making this worse than it needs to be." That changed the atmosphere completely. Your soulmate had expected denial, confusion, maybe even an excuse. Instead, the sender sounded as though they understood exactly what was happening. Their attorney warned them not to argue or make accusations. Preserve everything. Say nothing unnecessary. Let the records establish the facts. But then the sender made a mistake. They referenced the exact time printed on the receipt, a detail your soulmate had never shared with them. Now there were two mysteries colliding at once. First, how had this person learned about evidence that could challenge the timeline? Second, why were they so desperate to know whether your soulmate planned to use it? Your soulmate searched their old messages and found a conversation from weeks earlier that suddenly carried a different meaning. The same person had casually asked whether the place your soulmate visited for you kept electronic records. Your soulmate had answered, "I don't know." At the time, it sounded like ordinary curiosity. Now it felt like someone checking whether the visit could ever be verified. Stay till the end, because your soulmate found another message immediately afterward. The person had suggested paying with cash whenever possible so the surprise would remain private. Your soulmate had ignored that suggestion and used a traceable payment method instead. That single decision may have preserved the independent timestamp they now desperately needed. Then the situation accelerated. Your soulmate's attorney confirmed that the receipt alone would not settle everything, but it could support a request for the disputed timeline to be examined alongside the other records. The security information and witness account mattered too. Your soulmate gathered everything without deleting, editing, or altering a single item. And just when they believed they finally understood who had been watching their movements, the observer called again with a revelation that reopened the entire mystery. The voice recording had a longer original version. The observer had previously sent only the final seconds because they were afraid of what came before. Now they were ready to provide the complete recording. Your soulmate listened carefully. Near the beginning, another voice could be heard in the background asking a question about you. It was faint, but recognizable. Your soulmate knew that voice, and it belonged to someone who had never appeared anywhere in their list of suspects. That background voice changed the entire shape of the mystery. Your soulmate listened again, this time with their attorney present, careful not to assume more than the recording could actually prove. The voice belonged to someone who had always seemed completely outside the conflict, someone who knew about you, but had never openly questioned your soulmate's decisions. Yet on the recording, that person asked, "Are they still planning to do it tomorrow?" The answer was muffled, followed by several seconds of silence, and then came the sentence your soulmate had already heard about keeping them away until the decision changed. Suddenly, there appeared to be another connection between the secret involving you and the pressure surrounding the warrant. But your soulmate noticed something even more important. The background speaker mentioned tomorrow before the private file was supposedly accessed. If the timestamp on the recording was genuine, someone knew about your soulmate's plan earlier than the evidence suggested. That sent your soulmate back to the very first moment they had decided what to do for you. Only two people had been present when the idea was initially discussed. One was already known. The other was the voice now faintly captured on the recording. Your soulmate remembered that conversation clearly. They had said they wanted to finally show you the truth through actions instead of promises, and they had mentioned the place they would need to visit to prepare everything. Nothing about police. Nothing about an allegation. Nothing that seemed dangerous. Yet within days, strange questions began appearing about their movements. Could that first conversation have been where the entire chain started? Your soulmate still refused to make an accusation without evidence. Instead, their attorney focused on what could actually be verified: the recording's original metadata, the receipt, the witness statement, the security record, and the sequence of messages. Piece by piece, emotion was being replaced by a timeline. Then came the update everyone had been waiting for. The attorney had managed to present enough information for the new evidence to receive urgent attention, but that did not automatically erase the warrant or guarantee what police would do next. Your soulmate needed to remain calm and follow legal instructions. At that exact moment, another message arrived from the unfamiliar voice on the recording. There was no denial. No explanation. Just one sentence. Before you hand over everything, ask your witness what they were promised. Your soulmate immediately contacted the witness, expecting confusion. Instead, the witness went silent for nearly a minute before admitting there was something they had withheld. Someone had offered them something, not money, but something powerful enough to make them consider staying quiet. And when your soulmate finally asked what they had been promised, the answer exposed a motive nobody had considered. The witness finally admitted what had been offered: protection from a private mistake that could damage their reputation if it became public. Someone knew about that mistake and had promised it would remain buried as long as the witness stayed quiet about seeing your soulmate during those missing minutes. Suddenly, their earlier hesitation made sense. They had not been protecting the person behind the pressure because they trusted them. They had been afraid. Your soulmate asked the most important question: who made the promise? The witness gave a name, and it was not the background voice from the recording. It was the same person who had encouraged your soulmate to keep the surprise for you completely secret. Now separate threads were beginning to cross. That person knew about the hidden visit, knew the witness could verify it, and apparently knew exactly what could persuade that witness not to speak. But one mystery remained. Were they acting alone, or had someone else been directing them? Your soulmate's attorney immediately focused on preserving the witness's account properly rather than turning it into another emotional confrontation. The witness agreed to explain what happened through the appropriate process and provide the messages connected to the promise. Those messages contained something your soulmate had never seen before, a reference to finishing this before tomorrow. Tomorrow again. Every road seemed to lead back to the day your soulmate intended to reveal their secret to you. Then one message went further. It said, once they miss the moment, everything can be controlled again. Your soulmate read those words several times. Whoever was behind the pressure did not merely want to inconvenience them. They seemed obsessed with preventing one specific moment between you and your soulmate. But why would tomorrow matter so much? The answer was hidden inside the item your soulmate had collected during the disputed timeline, the very item whose receipt might now help establish where they had actually been. For months, your soulmate had been preparing to give you something containing a truth they could no longer keep inside. Not a meaningless gift. Not an empty gesture. It held a written decision about the future they wanted with you and evidence of choices they had quietly made to protect that future. Someone apparently believed that once you saw it, you would understand everything your soulmate had been unable to explain. And that threatened whatever influence this person still had. Then the attorney called with another development. The new timeline evidence had raised serious questions that required review, and the witness's account could become especially important. Your soulmate felt hope for the